Yesterday you addressed the press briefing, which you usually um,
Said often when we do these briefings, we assist other ministries articulate what they are doing. Yesterday was a rare one where we were speaking to one of the major things we've been doing at the Ministry of Information, which is the Right to Information Act implementation. And the feedback I've received so far suggests that it was an eye opener to many people who didn't know, how rapidly or how quickly, I think the better word is quickly, how quickly, the implementation is running along. And it's kicked up a lot of interest.
when it comes to the right to information bill, I think it fits the phrase that success happens slowly and then quickly. The bill had been before several parliaments.
Yeah.
Then gets passed in March 2019. Then it gets assented in May of 2019, and then became effective in January 2020.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the rest of January 2020, we spent our time dodging COVID and ourselves and washing our hands.
Yeah.
So eventually the implementation has started. But it's quite interesting that you made references to, the number of times that there has been a call on the RTI office to release information.
Yeah.
For you, does this augur well for what the RTI is meant to deliver?
I think the data, as we put out yesterday, speaks for itself and suggests that we have come very far in its implementation. As you rightly mentioned, it was in 1999 that the Institute of Economic Affairs first drafted, in fact, what they called an Access to Information Bill. And as I explained yesterday, many people labor under the thought that it is the RTI Act that actually gives us the right to information. That's totally incorrect. The Constitution 1992 is the piece of legislation that gives us the right to information. So if you go to Article 21, 1F of the Constitution 1992, that is when we were all given the right to information. So as part of our rights, the right to free expression, the right to free association, etc., one of the other rights that we were giving is the right to information, i.e. information that is in the custody of any public institution or an institution, performing public functions or receiving public funds. And the reason is that for a democracy to function, we need informed participants in the democracy. Citizens, media, civil society groups, academia. You need people to be informed, people to have the truth, the fact, so that they can make informed decisions, they can make informed, intelligent contributions to the public conversations that are going on. And that is the reason for which the Constitution conferred on us the right to information. Now, like many other rights, you need to have some sort of mechanism to access that right. So, in fact, if you look in your Constitution, you will find that we've got economic rights, economic and social rights in the Constitution. There are questions about how we are ensuring that everybody can enjoy them. But on the matter of, right to information, the question of access remained until 1999 when the IEA first drafted a piece of legislation which sought to spell out how to access the right to information.
Okay.
And like you rightly mentioned, about 5 different, administrations had the opportunity to see it. In fact, even significantly amend it about 4 times, but none was bold enough to pass it because there was this fear that if you pass it, everybody will start running around looking for some information, and various, administrations were a bit worried that, everybody looking for some information may make it difficult to govern. President Akufo-Addo had a very different view. You recall that he was the Attorney General on whose watch that the criminal libel law was repealed under President Kufuor. And he's very big on human rights. So he was very clear right from the beginning that, listen, we need to get this passed so that there's clarity on how to access that right, so that people don't have to keep resorting to the courts in their bid to access this right. Because prior to the passage, if anybody wanted to access information in the custody of a public institution, the only resort was to go to court. Because if you went to the public institution, it's at their discretion. They'll tell you, I don't have it, I can't give it to you, it's not important. In fact, there were famous cases, if you recall the bus branding matter.
That's right.
Where a number of citizens wanted information. In fact, wanted a copy of the contract, and this was a public contract, which they believed had been untowardly structured. They couldn't get it.
So they had to go to court. This was the Citizen Ghana movement.
Absolutely. They had to go to court. So President Akufo-Addo was clear that, listen, we need to pass this so that there's clarity and you can go and access information. And so in 2019, Parliament, March 26, 2019, Parliament passed that bill into law. Then it had to go through the various corrective processes in Parliament, and then got transmitted to the Office of the President. And the President assented to it within 24 hours of its landing on his desk. That was on the 26th, I think, of March 2019. But the law in Section 86 gave us a 6-month preparatory period to put all the necessary structures in place. And it's because we had learned from our history where we pass a law, we confer an obligation or a right on a public institution, and the next morning we expect, because once that law is enforced, it should accrue in terms of rights or responsibilities.
That's right.
But we haven't put in place the structure. So if you recall, the Honorable Oparians, a member of Parliament for Suhuma at the time, he moved that amendment for us to have a 6-month preparatory period. And Parliament accepted it. So we had a 6-month preparatory period. And during that period, my job as Minister for Information was to ensure that we put all the structures in place for implementation by 1st January 2020. And thanks to God, thanks to the collaboration of civil society groups, the media, various entities, Ministry of Finance, we were able to put all of that in place. And from 2020 January, we've been implementing RTI. And what I did yesterday was to give an update of how far we have come since January 2020 and what remains even to be done.
It's quite interesting, the data that you shared yesterday. But, it's, for me, quite heartwarming to know that unless, as the Act describes, some information is of exempt nature, everything is available to everyone.
Yes.
And I'm not surprised that because of that, there's been more than 1,000 requests from the start of the implementation. What sort of, I don't know whether you have any insight on the sort of range of things that people have been looking for. Because I'm sure there are people who might want to, for the purposes of mischief, I might want to go and, petition the RTI office to know your English name.
Well, so, the law operates with a presumption that we don't care what you want the information for.
Right.
The law operates with a presumption that the onus is on you to use it for a responsible purpose.
Okay.
If you use the information for any purpose that brings or invites liability onto you, it is your own cup of tea.
Okay.
But we don't care what you want to use the information for. To the extent that that information is not exempt, you are entitled to it as a person within the Ghanaian jurisdiction. So you could be a natural person or an artificial person. You just have to come under the Act and apply in accordance with the Act, and then you can get it. Now, in terms of what kind of information people are looking for, a lot of people have been looking for copies of contracts. Okay. A lot of people have been looking for, the records of some particular transactions or some particular, developments. Mostly you have journalists and civil society groups making these applications. You have some limited members of the academia, and I've always been big on encouraging academia, students and faculty to use it a lot more than it's being used. When I was doing my dissertation for my first degree and even for my master's degree, I struggled to get information because, we have this penchant in this country that, it's my information. What's your problem? I don't have to give it to you. But
Compare with the
But actually, we have a right under Article 21(1)(f) of the Constitution. And so for academia, it's always been a burden to get information. And I have been hoping that a lot more members of academia will use it. We're getting some members of academia, picking up. But if I may quickly, just go back.
Yeah.
There's a legal architecture for the functioning of RTI. And over the last 6 months, I noticed that we need to do a lot more education for people to understand. And I'll speak more about it shortly.
Absolutely. It's 7 o'clock, and typically we'll be bringing you Sports Now. We will be bringing you Sports Now immediately after this conversation with Kojo Nkrumah, the Minister for Information and MP for Ofuasi Ayerbi. We're discussing the implementation of the Right to Information Act, the legal framework that was put in place to ensure that it served us well, is what he was just speaking on when I interrupted. So let's go back to you were mentioning that there was a legal framework that was put in place to facilitate the implementation.
I call it a tripod. There
Okay.
are 3 parts that must function, 3 organs that must function for RTI to be effective. One, you need the demand side, because if RTI will be effective, what it means is that it's either you in Chira or Nanaya or my friend Kojo Asante from CDD, or Professor somebody from somewhere who is demanding information. Right. So number one is the demand side.
Okay.
If you don't have people demanding information, RTI will not go anywhere. Then number 2 is the supply side. When they demand, there must be somebody trained and equipped to supply the information.
Okay.
Now, between these two, there's a regulator who is sitting on top ensuring that the supply side is functioning, the demand side is going in accordance with Act 989, and that there's an equilibrium in the operation of the law. Then what we do at the Ministry of Information is to manage the interactions between these 3 parts, this tripod. So first, on the supply side, what we had to do from 2020 was to ensure that every public institution has what we call an information unit. In fact, if you look at the original draft of the bill when it came to Parliament, it said there must be an information officer. I'm the one who moved the amendment on the floor requesting Parliament to change that to an information unit, because an officer is not exactly enough to serve the dictates or the obligations.
But having a unit means that you can actually make the logistic up.
Absolutely, and
more
where
strong.
you even require more than one. In the case of some of the ministries, if you look at the kind of requests that come in on a daily basis, an officer will not be enough.
I can imagine Ministry of Finance.
Exactly.
One officer won't be able to
Actually,
do
they
like
are
that.
number 1. They get the most
Are
requests.
you kidding?
I'm telling you, they get the most requests. So, you have to put together a whole information unit.
Wow.
Anyway, so our first task was to put together information units across the public institutions. We identified 539 public institutions at the time. And we've been successful in setting up 478 information units. The law allows us to either train and post an officer there, or to train somebody who works in the organization already to add it to their functions.
Okay.
And so to date, we have trained and posted about 320 information officers to man these 478 information units out of 539 institutions that were initially identified. And we've been working to sensitize the organizations, etc., for them to function. Now, on the supply side, therefore, we are pretty comfortable that we have put the people in place. We've put a lot of logistics in place, including computerized systems, etc. And so they are in a good place to supply. On the demand side, we've done some, may I say, limited public education. And as you mentioned already, about 1,035 RTI requests since January 2020 have come through. This cuts across the 478 information units as we have them now. We also continue to explore which other institutions must join the 539 bracket, and currently we have reason to believe that about 1,000, almost 1,000 institutions must comply with the Act, and we continue to work to engage them on that side, even as we grow the numbers of information units and information officers who are in there. On the regulatory side, that's where it gets a lot more exciting. The law is structured in such a way that if I came to your organization, assuming your organization is a covered entity under the Act, and I request for information from the information officer, and I don't get it, if I'm not satisfied, I appeal to the head of institution. So for all of those who keep writing to the heads of the institutions, we've been trying to make the point that the head of the institution is an appellate officer. You can't write to him directly. You've got to write to the information officer in the information unit.
Requesting for
it. If you're not comfortable, you appeal to the head of institution. If you are not comfortable with the decision of the head of the institution, then you go to the RTI Commission, the regulator. The regulator has so far, since 2021, received 101 petitions of people who were dissatisfied with the decisions that had been made by information officers and heads of institutions. 101.
Okay.
And they've been able to determine 26 of them. When you say determine, it means that they've gone through the whole process to hear the matter out and make a ruling. There are another, set of categories of matters that they have not had to determine. So, for example, they've used arbitrations to deal with some of those. They did not have to go through a full determination. They had to sit with the person requesting an institution and understand why you are refusing to make it available and come to a certain understanding. No, this one, I think you should be able to make it available. And the institution understands, and then they go ahead to do it. There are some of them, too, that have been discontinued by the applicants. So about 4 of them discontinued by the applicants. About 2 of them, they found out that where the information was being requested for was not where the information was held. So they had to refer to some other place. And then I think about 21 of them, were settled. And then there are some that are still pending. But here's the interesting statistic. About 14 public institutions have had to be subjects of penalties by the institution to the tune of 1.3 million Ghana cedis.
Before we get into that, I'd love for you to help us understand the parameters that create, both on the demand and the supply side, what would be exempt on the demand side, and then what constitutes grounds for an eventual penalty, as you just mentioned.
Okay. So if you read the Act between sections 5 and 16, it spells out several grounds on which the public institution, by law, can refuse to make the information available. So those are the ones that we call the exempt clauses. And I mean, they are quite a lot, but I'll give you just a few. So, for example, information that is used in decision-making is information that is exempt. And the reason for which the law says that information is exempt is to allow people to freely express views and opinions during the decision-making process. Because if it becomes a case where my view that I express during the decision-making process can be subject to RTI, over a period, people will be reluctant to freely express even dissenting views. So information of that nature is exempt. Information that borders on the security of the state is exempt.
Critical.
But that does not mean that security agencies themselves as entities are exempt.
Yes.
That's been one of the major things we've been trying to get the security agencies to understand. The fact that some information in your custody is exempt does not mean you are exempt. And by extension, it means that there are some institutions that are not security agencies, but may have in their custody some information relating to security. And therefore, even though they are equally covered as entities, that information is exempt.
Okay.
Information that borders on some aspects of the work of the presidency are also exempt. Information that deals with people's personal matters, medical records, other things are exempt. So you have various categories of exempt information. So when somebody applies, if you are going to say, no, I can't give you this information, it cannot be based on your whims and caprices.
You've got to have to make reference to...
You have to ground it in law
Okay.
and quote the particular section that I am unable to make this information available to you because it is exempt in accordance with section 5, subsection 2 of this act. And you quote that section accordingly. And if the person is of the view that he is dissatisfied, he or she is dissatisfied, that is when he will appeal. That 5, subsection 2 doesn't apply to this. Or if it's, on the face of it, it's clear that it applies, matter die. at that point in time. So there's a whole litany of exemptions. These are just a few highlights of some of those exemptions. And it is to ensure a balance that while we fulfill the constitutional obligation of making information generally available, what ought to be protected, whether in the interest of the state or in the interest of individuals or in the interest of the decision-making processes, is protected.
Well, our safety overall and as a state is paramount. And so I think it's commonsensical to see that, the provisions of the Act allows for access to information, but anything that will be detrimental to our safety is something that is exempted.
Absolutely.
Now, we've seen a number of stories in recent past where, somebody had gone to make a request for something and then as if photocopy boarding.
Yeah.
Are there fees and charges if someone makes a request for information?
Yeah, it was one of the major difficulties that we had in the beginning.
Okay.
Because processing information, reproduction of information comes at a cost. I could apply for information in a particular language. I could apply for it in a particular format. So let's say you have information which amounts to, I don't know, maybe a 1 gig or 1 terabyte. Let's say 1 terabyte rather, 1 terabyte size of information sitting on a pen drive. And I apply for it and I'm entitled to it. And I say I want it in print form. It's going to cost you some money to print
1 terabyte of
1
data.
terabyte of documents. And so the law makes room for charges for reproduction of information, depending on the type of information formats that you are looking for. But initially, these charges were being levied at the behest of the public institution. In fact, there was a famous case that went to court, and the court ruled that they're about, I think, $3,000 or $6,000 that the institution was asking for was
unreasonable and
outrageous, and cut down the cost of reproduction. But thankfully, we've been to Parliament for the fees and charges scheduled to include reproduction cost of various categories. There are various categories. So now it is a matter of law. It is no longer at the instance of the public institution to determine how much to charge for the reproduction of the information. And every year, indexed to inflation, et cetera, those charges will, change as you go along. But on the question of penalties that you asked earlier, often when the Right to Information Commission, that is the regulator, gets into a matter, it makes orders. If those orders are not complied with, it will impose an administrative penalty on you. There are instances where the Right to Information Commission will write to a public institution that we've received this petition from Nkrumah that he applied, and within 14 days when he's supposed to get a response, it's been 3 months, he's not received a response. We consider that as a refusal. Give us a basis on which you've refused this information. And the public institution will not even respond. And they'll impose a penalty on you.
So in essence, you've built a service level agreement and service standards in on the supply side.
Yes.
That if I ask for something, there must be a window within which...
Within 14 days. The law says within 14 days, you should get a response.
That says you're either going to get it or you're not.
Yes.
And from then on, we should be able to see some progress.
Especially when you pay the charges, etc., then you get it. In fact, if it is information that borders on safety, liberty, etc., within 48 hours, they have to give you a response.
Okay.
That is all ingrained in the law. But when that is not complied with, or even if you refuse, and that refusal is not grounded in law, and the commission is now seized with a petition on the matter, the petitioner invokes the powers of the commission. The commission requests for a response from you if you're not responding or you're not complying with the orders. They will impose an administrative penalty. And currently, a total of about 1.3 million Ghana cedis has been imposed on individuals and institutions for non-compliance with the orders or with the request from the commission. And there are pretty interesting stories that I was sharing yesterday. For example, HEFRA was requested to make some information available. They were failing to make a decision on the application that was filed, and it was viewed as a failure to perform the obligation under the Act. And this also now was coupled with their refusal to respond to the, letters of the commission. The commission levied a penalty of about 30,000 Ghana cedis. They delayed in paying, so they paid eventually 30,000 plus interest of about 20,000 Ghana cedis. And that is how firm we are being with public institutions. You have district assemblies, for example, Keta District Assembly, request came and, the assembly was of the view that, this is not important information. The commission got involved. They were being a bit obstinate in complying. And for them as well, an administrative penalty was levied. One of the banks, for example, and because it's still in court, I don't want to get into too much details.
That's right.
They said they are of the view that they don't have to comply with the act. The commission said, no, you are either receiving public resources or performing a public function. You have to comply. They said, no, won't comply. The commission levied an administrative penalty of 300,000 Ghana cedis on them. And they've gone to court now, challenging. In fact, yesterday, the commission's lawyers were in court defending the law that they have to comply, and if they are not compliant, that's why they have to pay this 300,000 cedis as an administrative penalty, and after that they
still have to comply.
Yes. So we are doing our best to be firm on public institutions because traditionally all over the world, public institutions are a bit, reluctant to provide information. So you need to be firm from the beginning, else people will find ways to get around it. But yes, so those are some of the administrative penalties. And for those who have refused to pay, we're in court, asking the courts to whether garnish their accounts or whatever and get those penalties paid and to give the orders that they have to comply.
Okay. Now, let me tempt you to take off your hat as Minister for Information at this point and just have a conversation around what the RTI could do for us, for our democracy, for the flow of information, for the empowerment of the common average Ghanaian like me. It's good that information helps. The more information you have, the better informed you can be. But could there be too much information?
I don't think there's something like too much information. I think it's how the information is processed and analyzed and used that matters. I mean, if you go on the internet, there's so much information. But it is how you sift through what you're looking for, how it's analyzed, how it's used, that matters. There is a reason for which the Constitution gives us the right to information. And I hinted at it earlier. For a democracy to function, you need participants who have fact, truth. This is what is described as information. People who know what the truth is. Why? Because you're going to ask people to make a decision. When they go to the polls, they have to make a decision. As governments govern, they have to make a decision on a daily basis as they follow the conversations on whether or not the government is making the right choices, the government is handling challenges appropriately, or the government is just being incompetent. If you don't have that, and you still have a democracy, you have a system where anybody gets up and throws some lies into the system, then people can't tell whether it's true or not, and based on their own idiosyncrasies may just believe it and end up making all sorts of decisions. That's even dangerous for a democracy. In fact, if you follow what's happening in America now, there's a major push to try and reset or correct what they believe has been an avalanche of lies that have been thrown into the American democracy. And they argue that it's distorting and undermining the entire democratic process. Democracy survives, democracy succeeds when there's fact, when there's truth. So I'll give you an example. Today, nobody can honestly say that we don't have economic challenges in Ghana. Whether those challenges are the doing of an incompetent administration, or those challenges are products of global shocks and some local issues, are matters that we should be able to have clearly as matters of fact. If you don't have factual, factual information is a tautology, but if you don't have facts in the public conversation, and we don't have the ability to provide data on what is happening in many other jurisdictions because there's access to information. Anybody can go anywhere and say, oh, you know what? In fact, I heard somebody say at a point that, you know why the currency is depreciating? That's when it was depreciating. So it's because the ministers have carried dollars and have taken it abroad. All sorts of.
You didn't give me some.
But you need to have a system where there are facts, and where the truth is told about why our currency depreciated at a particular point in time. And I don't have to be MPP, and you don't have to be NDC, and you don't have to be for, and I don't have to be against, but the fact is the fact.
That's right.
So it is important to have access to fact in a democracy, so that the truth is known. And even when somebody tries to throw something out there, you can now make the truth available. You can make the facts available. That's the reason for which you go to Parliament and we'll be, laying reports from the Finance Ministry and reports from this agency. The Ghana Statistical Service has to conduct surveys and publish those reports. That's some sort, and all of that is in line with the spirit of the constitutional right to information under 21(1)(f), to make information available so that the policymaker can, see what the facts are and make the right decisions. The citizen, the civil society group, the media, everybody has the opportunity to see what the fact is and use those facts for decision making and for commentary. So it's a big deal, and I don't think there's anything like too much information.
Okay.
It's about how we ensure that we have, people who have a deep understanding of whatever is being discussed around the table to examine whatever information is being made available so that we can make the right decisions as we go along.
Nana, I was just wondering what Ghana or life would have been like if we had the RTI during the days when there was a claim of the famous jacuzzi.
Yeah, not to mention the claims of a culture of silence, previous or present. I wanted to ask the Honourable Minister about your presentation yesterday and what seems to be trying to decentralise access to information. So we had a very interesting map showing that there are actually 6 regions from which you have had no applications at all.
That is true.
3 of them in the north, 2 of them, disappointingly, in the old Brahafa area. Wake up, my friends. Western North, no applications there. The vast majority of application requests coming in from Greater Accra, and a fair number from the Ashanti region. What further steps are you taking to try to decentralize access to information where people want it?
So just a bit of data for our listeners. About 87% of the information requests, since 2020 have come from the Greater Accra region. And then followed by the Ashanti region, about 9% of the requests from the Ashanti region. The rest are, spread across the other regions. But like you rightly mentioned, Western North is 0, Bono is 0, Ahafo is 0, Upper West is 0, Northeast is 0, Northern region itself is 0. And this is data for 20, and I think I have to correct it. This is data for 2022. Right. This is not the cumulative. This map is just for 2022, just trying to give, a sense of where the data requests are coming from or the information requests are coming from. Actually, we have decentralized. Across the 261 districts, there are information officers at the district assemblies. So the supply side is being made available in the 261 districts. It's also being made available in the 16 regional coordinating councils. And then for all public institutions that are across, the country, at least about 539 of them, we have supply side officers there. They may be staff of the Information Services Department or staff of the actual organization that have been designated to perform this function. Either way, the supply side is sorted. The demand side is where I think we have to do a lot more work so that people know and can actually go there and request for information. And I think over the years, because people have not been used to this, many people, resort to some other form of finding information. So some more education will help us to get some more use of the Act and its provisions in requesting for information, especially in many of these places where, the requests have not gone through. On the regulatory side, we are also beginning to extend our footprint. So this year, we are hoping to open up a Kumasi office for the regulator, and a Sunyani office as well for the regulator. The commission Executive Secretary Oppong Boateng and Justice Oforiatta, the board chair, they've done a fantastic job. They've been one of the public institutions that's hit the ground really running very, very quickly. In these few years, a staff of 120, board of 7, and really running across the country. And they are going to hopefully open their Kumasi and Sunyani offices before the end of this year, and budgets allowing in subsequent years. We expect to have them in the northern zone and in some other parts of the country so that regulation can also move there, even as supply has moved there. I think what is lagging behind right now is demand. Yes, and some more public education will be helpful in that area.
Wonderful.
Talking about demand, you also spoke yesterday about your intention to introduce an online records management system.
Yeah.
Any further news on that? When you exactly expect to have the system up and running so that people presumably can apply online for information?
So the system is ready, but what we now are going to do over the next 2 to 3 months is to ensure that the supply side is fully acquainted with the system. Now, the supply side has within it 2 arms. First, the records officers in the institution who keep records of institutional information need to be very well acquainted with this online records management system. Currently, they're doing it in a manual form mostly. And it's the reason for which sometimes you have delays, because somebody comes requesting for information and they have to go through a manual process to find where that information is within the organization. The actual file. This online records management system has the records management component, which requires the records officers first to key in the data of files from God knows when into the system, so that now it's easy to reference where this file is. And then also what we call the data mapping tool. So you are required to do a data map within the organization so that you can also track where your files are, where particular data sets are. Then this online records management system also now would allow the demand side to be online and to put in a request. And when that request is done, then the information officer, who is also on the supply side, the other side of the supply side, is the one who received this request. But by the time he receives it, he or she knows where in the organization, because the data mapping has taken place, this information will be resident. And then the final part of the 4-part component is that the law requires every institution to publish what we call an information manual, which essentially is a manual that tells the whole world what kind of information you have or don't have. And it makes it easier because we're having instances where people come to my ministry and make a request for information that we don't have. But once we publish our information manual, which we have done, then you know what we have and what we don't have. And you actually know which organization has the information you are looking for. So when everybody does their data mapping and then uses it to construct their information manual, when the demand side is requesting, you have clarity of what is available and what is not available. We've completed the work. We now have to go through a process of getting the various arms, 539 institutions, 2 different arms in each institution, that's over 1,000, finish that back-end work, and then now get the demand side acquainted before we now deal with another 539 information officers who can then utilize it. So it's going to take a while, but we think that in the next year, that should be one of our major successes on RTI in the next year.
Fantastic. Well, huge archiving job that will have to be done then.
It is.
Yeah.
Keep some code clever people very busy for a long while, I think.
Should we go on an excursion one of these days?
You should.
To the ORMS. I could easily get lost in there. It might be a fun thing to do.
That's why I suggested.
Dear. Here we go.
Oh, well, 28 minutes past 7 on this Acid Breakfast Show. We're talking to Kojo Nkrumah, MP for Ofuasi Ayerbi and Minister for Information, helping us appreciate the work that's been done so far since the implementation of the Right to Information Act commenced. I must say that, it's evident that a lot of work has gone into it. And I must commend you for the briefings. I think that it offers an opportunity for us to be abreast of what's happening in the various units within government and the ministries. Today is the 11th day of May. 42 years ago today, Bob Marley left us. You didn't think I was going to have a conversation with you today and not ask
With
about
Robert Nesta Mali.
Exactly. How have you been affected by his work?
My father had a number of Bob Marley and the Wailers records.
Okay.
So I don't know, for some reason, usually on Saturday mornings, you know.
What is it with reggae and Saturday
I
mornings?
have absolutely no idea. It must be a spiritual thing. So usually on Saturday mornings, he would slot it in and, you know, put it on full blast.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was when I first got acquainted with reggae music generally and with Bob Marley in particular. I grew up in Koforidua. First time I came to Accra was in 1989 in Mataiko here in Accra. So, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93 is when, I got acquainted with it. And then over the years, when I graduated from school, university, I think in university as well, then got more ingrained in general reggae music, Tosh and all of those others. But when I then got on radio, occasionally, slot in some redemption song or something like that.
So what's your personal favorite?
Well, there are two of them. One of them will be Redemption Song, as I just mentioned. And I don't quite recall the title of this one, where it says, I want to turn up my
Music.
turn it to full what tonight, rubber dub style or something like that. Yeah. In a rubber dub style.
Yeah. I know that.
In a rubber dub
We're gonna
style.
find that in a second, but I have got your redemption song.
All right.
Draw bad card.
And
Bad
bad
card.
card. Yes,
card.
yes,
Oh, Nanaya, I didn't know your reggae was that accurate.
Are you Nanaya?
No, it isn't.
Nanaya is like an onion.
Really?
Every day you peel one layer, you discover there's even more.
And then you might have something go in your eyes.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think bad card. That's the one. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to. Okay, so let's take one of the two. I've got bad card, and I've also got.
Hit me with a bad card.
All right. Well, we're gonna end this conversation. Thank you very much, Kojo, for making time for us this morning. And,
No, it's good.
Keep up the good work.
It's good to be here, and I thank you for the opportunity. One last thing I'll say is that the Attorney General has also given prosecutorial powers to the Right to Information Commission. So not only could they be just imposing penalties on you for non-compliance, you could actually get prosecuted now if you commit an offense under Act 989. And an offense under Act 989 includes obstructing the work of the information officer. It's a big deal for us because we think that it goes to the root of our democracy, and we ask all other players in the public space to help us. And to you, our colleagues in the media, first, thanks for the airtime to explain some more. And we ask our other colleagues to give us some more space to educate the public on this.
Absolutely. There are rights, and those rights come with responsibilities. Let's all ensure we do our part. Bad Card by Robert Nesta Mali. And thank you for coming.
Thank you, man. Thank you.